getting beamed into outer space. No, okay. On the eve of the Second World War, some 500,000 Jews continued to make their lives in the Maghreb, much as they had done for centuries, if not millennia. Many, especially but not only those in large urban centers and coastal cities like Casablanca and Tangier, Oran and Algiers and Tunis, were also witness to an interwar period which was quickly shedding its promise for its peril. The printed press, the realm of radio, and the arrival of European Jewish refugees on the southern side of the Mediterranean carried news of unfolding horrors, which spiraled out in an ever-expanding orbit around Nazi Germany. In the historic Jewish quarters of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, meanwhile, settler-instigated violence brought elements of war in the making to their doorstep. With the rapid collapse of France's Third Republic in 1940 and its replacement with an authoritarian and anti-Semitic regime known as Vichy, the processes we tend to associate with Europe alone were replicated and reformulated in what was once considered by scholars as both a margin to and marginal of the center. In quick succession, anti-Jewish race laws across French and now Vichy-occupied North Africa joined those already in force in Italian-occupied Libya. In Algeria, Jews had their citizenship summarily removed. Numerous clauses were imposed, affecting not only the liberal professions, but also extending to domains like public performance. Children were expelled from school. Spoliation, Aryanization followed census taking. A sprawling camp system was erected. Distance from the center perhaps meant that Jews in the Maghreb were spared the ultimate horrors of their co-religionists to the north. But for the thousands of Maghrebi Jews who had established themselves in metropolitan France before the war and found themselves marooned there after 1940, their fate was a shared one. For countless North African Jews, trauma was part and parcel of their lived experience during the war years. We know this for two reasons. The first is due to the sheer volume of bureaucratic documents, private letters and correspondence, press accounts, photographs, poetry, music, and memoirs produced in real time and shortly thereafter. The second is that Aomar Boum, whom we are honored to have with us tonight, has spent a career surfacing this history and helping us to make sense of it. Indeed, the depth and breadth of our knowledge of World War II, the Holocaust in North Africa, owes tremendously to Boum, as well as his frequent research collaborator, Sarah Abravaya-Stein. The entangled history we deal with tonight, including that layering of fascism over colonialism, is far from new to him. In fact, the very period which had been excised in certain accounts or ignored in more normative historiography has long served as a connective tissue in his voluminous scholarship. It bears mention that the subject already appears in his path-breaking Memories of Absence, published in 2013. Of course, it takes stage front and center in his path-breaking and award-winning edited volume, The Holocaust in North Africa, co-edited with Sarah Stein and released by Stanford in 2019. It marks the pages of his myriad entries for the U.S. Holocaust and Memorial Museum online Holocaust Encyclopedia. It's made that much more tangible and teachable through his sourcebook, Wartime North Africa, also co-edited with Stein and published in 2022. Finally is not the appropriate word to use here, as we will soon learn, but finally it bridges the scholarly, his corpus, with the public-facing Undesirables, which we'll discuss tonight, illustrated by the late Nadjib Berber, and now translated into French and Arabic. In a review of this graphic novel, an imperfect term that is graphic novel, as we will soon discuss, I wrote the following words of praise earlier this year. Quote, and I'm quoting myself here. The strength of Undesirables derives in part from its staying power. The reader, from North America to North Africa, will be left thinking often of the real, imagined, and larger-than-life characters who, like Hans Frank, are as complex as they are human. The photo novel come photorealism offers students a cinematic approach to a series of images that will be encountered in the classroom, but which in the past have felt detached from their stark reality. Furthermore, through their graphic novel, Boum and Berber advance a multi-directional methodology to modern North African historiography, very much in the vein of Julia Clancy Smith, in which border crossing comes into focus as does a story centered on people rather than on national construction alone. Finally, for those of us who have never encountered the history of World War II, the Holocaust in North Africa, Undesirables provides the perfect entry point. For those of us who endeavor to push our scholarship to new limits, Boum and Berber's text and images serve as inspiration, end quote. Please thank me and welcome in Dr. Aomar Boum to Montreal. It's difficult to know where to start because, as I mentioned, you have an incredible career of surfacing sort of all manner of elements of North African history, that intersection of history and anthropology, not just questions of Jews in North Africa, but also questions of the Jewish-Muslim relationship, nationalism, but also questions of north and south, periphery and center. But I guess I want to sort of start with the biographical, and I want to ask you how you came upon the story in general, or perhaps another way to think about it is, how did this story find you?
First of all, thank you for this the invitation. Thanks to the museum, to the Sephardic Federation, and for the audience for being here. I would say that the first encounter with this story, or at least the camp, was through my father. My father, that I remember here, he just passed away, say, almost a year ago, at the age of 110. Yeah, yeah. He was a postman, what we call raqqas. I actually just wrote this book with my daughter about him to remember him. Yeah, it's raqqas is a messenger who carries letter from one place to another on foot. And he did during the colonial period. So he was born in the period of the World War I. And in my interviews for Memories of Absence, he was part of the the great grandparents generation that I interviewed. And so a lot of information I got about Morocco, Jewish Morocco or Muslim Morocco during the 1920s and 30s and 40s was through his voice. So he mentioned that, and then I bracketed off as part of the story of Mohammed V and his relationship to Moroccan Jews, and the whole story of World War II and Al-Glawi, the tribal lords in the south. I put them aside, and then I decided this is not a story that I want to talk about in the book. So, and then I said at some point when I finish my first book, Memories of Absence, I'll come back to that. So in 2006, I decided to begin this conversation by going to French Algeria, colonial Algeria, and then I began by looking at the influence of French anti-Semitism on North African, especially Algerian settlers between 1880 and 1890s by looking at how Ernest Renan and his students influenced that. So that was really the beginning of my beginning with the Holocaust and Holocaust history. And when I looked at that, I said, well, I go into the U.S. Holocaust Museum, 2006. They had nothing basically. They were looking at picking stories and documents about only the Holocaust and what it meant, implications that has to do with World War II. So I started working with the museum, and I said, one of the things we need to do is not focus on, we have to start with the big story. You have to situate Morocco, Jewish Morocco, in the larger Moroccan history, and then from there you can build on. Then you will get to some of these. So that's the beginning. And as I started working with the museum, started in 2009, 2010, 2011, I started 2013. Then I began to see how we have so much material, especially the material they collected from the archives that the Germans took after they entered Berlin, and then they took a lot of those documents to Moscow. The U.S. Holocaust Museum apparently in 1990s photocopied them, brought them, but nobody touched them. So this way I start figuring out and finding more sources. Especially what's really interesting is the Arabic sources coming from Egypt, from Algeria, from Paris, the Lika archive. That's what led me to this story. And it led me in particular to documents that talk about the relationship between North Africa and Metropole France, North Africa and Germany, and especially Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, as well as Egypt. And from there, I began to think about organizing a conference 2015 with Sarah Stein at UCLA. Then out of it came our first book, Memories of the Holocaust in North Africa. And also we start thinking about documenting the story from the bottom, because we looked at it from the top and then talking about what happened to North African Jews, North African Muslims, Spanish Republicans, all of these individuals that were going back and forth between the southern part and the northern part of the Mediterranean, what happened to them during that period. That led to the second book. But before that, I also worked with the museum on Encyclopedia of Camps and Ghettos. And that Encyclopedia of Camps and Ghettos really framed this book that I was able to do with Nadjib. God bless his soul.
Can you advance 2 slides? And then one more. One of the questions that I think about often is sort of, what is the process by which a history is silenced? And what's sort of fascinating about North Africa, World War II, and the Holocaust is sort of one of the most sort of iconic films of all time is, of course, Casablanca, which sort of puts this story on the map, as it were. And what I also would love for you to talk about are the actual physical traces of the Second World War as it plays out in North Africa. And my question is sort of, there's this element of a sort of a whispered history that you inherit from your father, probably before you ever dreamed of leaving the South and eventually making your way around the world. And so I'm curious, just sort of like thinking about why this story that some of us know well, but some of us are coming to understand for the first time, why did it remain hidden or buried or silenced for so long?
I think partly has to do with the French history and the French historians bracketing off this story themselves. So we have to wait until the late 1990s and early 2000s, at least the 1990s, you start seeing French historians dealing with this. Although there are classic books written about this, and also even the North African Jews, whether they're in Israel or in Latin America or in the United States or in Canada, very few people also talked about it, because also I think it's, when I looked at some of the biographies of North African Jews, they talk about this notion of the guilt of survival versus, so there is that notion that we have to prioritize people who are actually went through the Holocaust, and that's why Sarah and I were trying to think about where the extension of the Holocaust, the reverberation of the Holocaust. So I think it has to do with that, with the metropole itself trumping this and making sure that this story is not told as much as it's possible. Then you have also the North African historians. North Africa, there's more of an interest on an Arabo-Islamic history. Jewish, in the case of Morocco, is different because we have a national school of Jewish history that's really vibrant, and it has been able to record the history of the Jewish communities. But still, it was not the Holocaust and the implication of what happened in Europe on the southern part of North Africa was not that. I wouldn't say it's not important. It was marginal, just like other stories were marginal. Case of race, case of slavery, all of these things. People talked about them. It's there. They're footnotes, but they're not center stage. Yeah.
And then sort of archivally speaking, I mean, or sort of when do you happen upon this story? Outside of sort of a familial setting. And I'm curious about sort of, the order of operations in which, I mean, some of these sites are not that distant from where you grew up. But in some ways, it seems like it almost takes an entire, career and a generation to come back to this place and understand it anew. So, what leads you to the Holocaust Memorial Museum in DC in the first place? And I'm curious about sort of like the mechanics of how this unfolds.
I have to credit here the work of Robert Satloff. His book in 2006, I have all kind of questions about it, but I think it's a book that drove us as historians to think about these questions. So Alma, Heckman, Susan Miller, her book on Nadjib al-Attar, Daniel Schroeter and I were working now on a book on Mohammed V, and in 19, hopefully it should be out in a year or a year and a half from now. So all of these things, it really pushed us to, and I'm not saying there are also Israelis who talked about this in the 80s, in the late 1980s, early 1990s. So already have a conversation about the connection between North Africa and Europe. So we did. So it really, given the fact that he used archives from the museum, but personally we thought that's not enough, and we wanted to really give a broader description of what happened in that period. So we have, personally, it's a good that a book like that came, and then it drove us to complicate the story, to nuance the story more and more. And then the other thing that for me, being at the museum, especially given the fact that there are archives sitting there, you just have to look for them. So as you said, there are in the archives, but also in the space. I remember going to there is a mine called Bouazer, which is one of the most important cobalt mines in the world still today. The Germans had their eye on that mine in 1911, before even World War II, and then it's just a few kilometers from where I lived. But through the stories of my father, and then telling me not only about local Muslims and local Senegalese soldiers working on that mine, but in the 1920s and 30s, but also how Polish Jews were brought from Casablanca to work in that mine as far south as south of Ouarzazate, if you're familiar with the Moroccan geography. So it's that. So moving back and forth between the archives and learning from the types of brilliant scholars like Sarah Stein, who really is excellent at, as you know, at how you go from one archive to another. You don't look at archives in Morocco only, but you go to Germany, you go to Israel, you go to Latin America, you go to the United States, Australia, to France, all over the place. You go to people's homes to look at it. So that's how I was able to really figure out the dynamics of these different places, and also how people were moved from one place to another to be part of an ecosystem of extraction of resources and labor.
It's incredible. Can you tell us a little bit more about, and Kat, maybe you could advance one slide and then 30 seconds later another slide. I'm wondering if you could tell us about where this is in Morocco.
Yeah.
What the history of these places are prior to the Second World War, and then their transformation in the course of the Holocaust.
First of all, this is a picture I took. I was with my daughter in 2021, just right during the COVID time. So we flew from, and I had to take some of these pictures for the book, and also for another project. So this is not far from Oujda. If you can go back, you can see actually France there, the building material that's brought from Marseille. That's just what's left over. So if you do an archaeology of Holocaust, but you can, so this is one of the main station called Tendrara. It's in the not far from Oujda. This is part of a railway system that's called the Mer Niger, which connects the Mediterranean. It's supposed to connect the Mediterranean via Oran, the city of Oran in Algeria. It goes through Oujda. From Oujda, it goes south through in the oriental part of Morocco, and then it goes back again to Algeria. and then it goes south all the way to Niger, le boucle du Niger. And so the French, what they had in their, this is a project that the French has as early as the mid 19th century. And the army, they wanted to establish a railroad system that connects the boucle du Niger, or sub-Saharan Africa, all the way to Oran, straight to Marseille, and to take all the natural resources as fast as possible to the metropole, to France, and then expand it all over Europe. They also had an idea that's called the Trans-Saharan Railroad System. They have another idea which is called the Trans-African Railroad System, which connects the Oran and to Boucle du Niger. It goes all the way to South Africa. So that was a huge project that they were thinking about with other European colonizers at the time. And most of this railroad system was meant to move the natural resources, especially from the mines, to Oran, and from Oran to France. And mostly, I would say, the manganese, all of these, that's not only owned by France, but also owned by other governments, like Belgium government, Netherlands. Many governments had ownership of these mines. And it is around this that the whole book is about. The book is about how to think about movement and circulation of bodies of people, which happens to be refugees at the time, mostly Jews. Jews probably represent about 20%, but also a lot of Spanish Republicans. We can talk about that later. And then from that how they were used as part of a colonial economic system at the time.
Okay, so I was wondering if you could say a bit more about, so we had this sort of colonial fantasy before World War II to establish a trans-Saharan rail to transport goods that accelerates during World War II an income and influx of European Jewish refugees, Spanish Republicans, and others. So can you tell us a little bit more? We'll get to the book too, but like how does this layered history unfold? What does it look like? And why is the sort of this colonial fantasy, how does it start to become reality with the advent of
That's a great
fascism?
question. That's a great question. So in 2011, or I'll go back by 3 or 4 years, around 2006, 1906, 1908, as the French are thinking about colonizing Morocco, there was a commission called the La Commission the Trans-Saharan Commission. This is part of the French Senate, and they were already lobbying the industrialists and the financiers to commit to this project. The project would cost a lot of money. How to put a railroad system across the desert, because given the labor, water, and all of these things, they were struggling with this. So also, they were struggling with raising money for that. The Germans were competing with the French over Morocco. So you have the Tangier, not the Tangier, but the Agadir case, where then later on Germany agreed to let France control Morocco as long as they start with roads before they put the railroad system. So from 1912 until 1919, the French was supposed to build only railroad system, because the Germans knew that with the establishment of the railroad system, you're going to accelerate the use of the mines, and it's a whole competition between the two empires. So once World War, we know the World War I happens, Germany is defeated, the French ended up taking control. So there is an acceleration right after 1918, 1919. Lyoté decides to start building this railroad system and then using local labor. That's where the French corvée comes in. By 1920s, my father was already part of that. There was and other people. So these camps, before even the use of the beginning of what we call the refugees came, and then were being used in this project, local indigenous people were already being used in that. And by 1930, it was approved in the Senate. This project was approved in the Senate. we know what happened after during the 1930s. The Germans were also interested in putting another line from Italy with working with the Italians through East Africa and going all the way to the south. So when Vichy, when the French lost and Vichy came to power, the Pétain decided this is our moment to start, and then it was signed. They started the project, and then they had the question of labor. The most important question they had is who is gonna. They can't use indigenous the tribes in the south in the desert, especially the Tuareg, and so they said we have two people to use: Spanish Republicans after the end of the Spanish Civil War, and then we can also use partly local labor. They have to pay them. And then we can also use refugees that are caught either in Oran or Casablanca or in Algiers, and they get sent to these camps.
So again, the sort of the incredible layering here. So your father is part of this forced labor regime.
As early, I would say, as 1931, 32.
And
because
then,
that's the first time that the camp of Ouazzar was used.
And then in time, this labor will be complemented or replaced by European Spanish Republicans and also European Jews. In Undesirables, you tell the story in part, but also sort of like in part doesn't do it justice. I mean, it's very vibrant. Can you tell us about the European Jewish experience in some of these camps and how we know about them?
Okay. So let me first say that I'm not the first one to write about this movement of population from France, especially from Marseille through Oran or Algiers or Casablanca. There are other European Jews, mostly Jews, who recorded this through drawings, and that's where I learned actually the first idea actually in terms of the style of writing came to me when I looked at a drawing that I found in the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum as part of what we call the archives that the Soviet took to Moscow, and there was a drawing by a Muslim by the name of Fatrao. If you can, I think we probably have used.
Kat, will you advance a few slides?
So let me, if we have some more. No, so you can just go. Yeah, this is one of them, but I don't think we have it here. Sorry. So but there is an Egyptian writer who spent time also between in Algeria, and he took Mein Kampf, he translated into Egyptian dialect, and he had drawings that accompanied that. There is also all kind of artists, Egyptian artists who were born in Alexandria, and then did a lot of caricatures of Mussolini and Hitler. There are also German and Soviet and Czech as well as Polish Jews who also, as they moved from Germany and Poland to France, and from France ended up in North Africa, they were able to draw, even though they were forbidden from writing at the time, because as part of, we can talk about the idea of erasure, what this book meant for me as far as fighting the erasure of these memories. So in to some extent, when you think about this style of writing, for me it came first of all through this knowledge, this body of knowledge we have already existing in the archives, in the manuscripts that are available to us. And what I try to do is really translate it and make it available to people through a different style that I call, for me, as an anthropologist who uses history and oral history and manuscripts in his writing. So for me, I start always with history, manuscript, and then I supplement that with oral history. So it's for me like going back to the past and following the trails of these individuals as it happens in real time. So if you look at the style, actually, if you look at the book, we tried as much as possible to give it a realistic, because Nadjib has different styles, but we made sure that I want the reader to feel that as if it's there, following the steps. So we start with Germany, we get to Marseille, Algiers, France is an important part of this, Paris, then Marseille, and then Casablanca. And the reason why, of course, Casablanca, most of the people, they either get to Casablanca. Once they get to Casablanca, they either be able, if they have like, for instance, Sophie Freud. I don't talk a lot about these important people like Sophie Freud, who went through Casablanca, spent about 6 months there. There's so many other very important people who were able to go through Casablanca, Portugal, and from Portugal to come to the Americas, if the American government allowed them at the time. But the idea for us is really to write a visual, entre parenthèses, ethnography of what life was during the moment of the Holocaust.
So there's this incredible thing if you think about.
Can I say something about Nadjib? So, and I was lucky to find somebody like Nadjib. Nadjib
the
is
illustrator.
Yeah, the illustrator. Nadjib Berber happens to be. I think this story was meant to be told by Nadjib. In many ways. First of all, you have a German. You have somebody who knows Germany very well. You have somebody who understands French history very well. A North African, happens to be from an Algerian background, and also somebody who is part of the second generation of Algerian artists. So all of these things made it easy for me, and who is married to a Jew, also the daughter and the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor. So all of that helped me in some way to really transmit this story in a perfect way, because of the knowledge. I didn't have to do a lot of explaining to him. I just come up with the idea, we write the script, we go over the script, and I said, I want this. And then we sometimes we use images, sometimes we don't. And then he was just, for me, I use the present. But he's a brilliant artist in many ways. Yeah.
Can we advance to the first slide so we can see the one of the panels from Undesirables? Okay. I mean, here we get a sense that I just want to sort of like put it a little bit like even more in context. I mean, one, we get a sense of sort of how you start to move toward this format, in that you had to do the sort of traditional scholarly work first, meaning sort of in your first single authored monograph, Memories of Absence. One of the generations you interrogate as you're sort of thinking about how Muslims remember Jews is a generation that's really framed by the Second World War, which is sort of already, I should say, outside of the box. If you look at some of the more nationalist historiography in Morocco from an earlier period, one chapter will end, sort of memoiristic, one chapter will end in 1939 and then pick up again in 1945. And sort of already the work of you doing to fill in those gaps is remarkable. And then you move to North Africa and the Holocaust, or the Holocaust and North Africa, in which you frame the terms of this history and historiography, and then you solicit, some of the best minds around the subject possible to come together for this edited volume. Then you continue to do the work with wartime North Africa, in which your goal, from what I understand, is to make this as teachable as possible, to sort of take it out of the realm of academies and sort of all of the scholarship that's so often so unintelligible, and to render it really tangible by providing English language translations of dozens of sources from all sorts of perspectives. Jews, Muslims, neither of the two, North Africans, Europeans, Sub-Saharan Africans as well, to again sort of bring this history to life, to make it readable, and sort of for students of sort of all types to begin to comprehend what we're talking about when we move sort of the center and the periphery ever closer together. I mean, the stakes are incredibly high. I just want to underline that because one of the things you highlight in North Africa and the Holocaust is that the question of reparations are at stake here as well. This is not just sort of a story of historiography, but what is to be paid to those who suffered under this system. And then, given what you sort of already outlined, this means that it goes beyond the story of the Holocaust in World War II when thinking of the forced labor that predates it as well. I mean, sort of the geopolitics of what you're doing are remarkable, even if it's sort of understated. So if we move along, I mean, we get an incredible sense that you're in the archives, which the two of us find exciting. I'm not sure if everybody else does as well. And you're encountering not just some of the images we've seen of Jewish forced laborers sort of, deep in the Sahara, for example, but political cartoons of all manner and from very, very different perspectives as well. And from that, you begin to move toward this idea of the graphic novel, cartooning, illustrations. Can you talk about sort of like how you brought that idea from that place of ideational to the reality that this book not only exists, but exists in three different and important languages. So English as well as French, and Arabic too. And so this is, this question of translation, and it's for sale in the back, by the way. This question of translation, I also want to get to, because as I work with you on the translation of my book into Arabic, I see sort of all sorts of issues rise to the fore about sort of not just the translatability of ideas, but also the way in which we construct sentences and do our work, etc. But first, how do you take this from vision to reality? Why Nadjib? How do you do the work? And Kat, maybe you can flip, ahead to a slide to get another sense of what it is we're dealing with.
So first of all, thank you. I had another life before I came back to academia, and where I went to do my MA and then PhD. When I graduated from Qadi Iyad in Marrakesh in 1993 with a BA English Language and Literature, and with a specialty with the concentration in direction and script writing. So I did acting, so I was in drama, and also I worked for Paramount Picture for a year in Warzazat. So
Los Angeles makes sense for you.
So it gets back to outreach, and I'm a big fan of Stanislavski and Brecht, both theorists of acting and how you communicate with the public. And for me, when we finished those books with Sarah and with other friends, I thought that we have a problem as far as how we think that it's great to do all this work, but also it's important to communicate with the public. And also it's mostly important to communicate with K through 12 teachers. Not what we do in universities in terms of research and teaching new generations of scholars is one thing, but also I'm a big fan of K through 12. And I want always to think about creating a relationship between faculty and what we do and teachers, because they are central to the mission of educating generations. So one of it is thinking about the graphic. So that the way we think about, and they went, if you look at in the 60s and 40s, the great history of graphic novels that was in comics, that was in some way mirroring what the French did, was part of my thinking, especially in Sudan. You think about Sudan today, and the people. But if you look at the comics that came out of Sudan and the way why they have a very good educational system in Iraq, in Jordan, in Egypt, in Lebanon, in Syria, all of these. So I had to go and look at all of that. I said it's an opportunity for us to think about a bigger educational model. So and that's where this came from. And it came from because also, as I said, I was lucky to be a neighbor of Nadjib. And then I described the project to him, and he said, "No, I don't want to do anything with politics." He said, "No, it's not in politics. We're going to do a book that's scholarly, and people can get from it whatever they want as far as politics, but we want to follow the trail of scholarship and research." And I'm glad I did it. And actually, this opened up a lot of doors for me to think about. I'm working on another project that's similar to this. Can you go back? Just the first slide of this. Yeah, just here. Let's see. So if you think about it, so I said drama and the theater and how you write a play. So really, I was very lucky to learn the skills of how you write a script for a drama. So you can see, for me, every person here represents something. So Joseph is not only represents the father of Hans, but also he's also represents a generation of Jews that came before World War One and then fought for World War One, fought for Germany and the German nationalists, and also so there is already every story is linked. Hans is about a new generation of Jews already worried about what's happening in Germany, but also he's linked to the Middle East. He's linked to what was happening in Palestine at the time. We get Jews and Muslims, and he was learning, he has connections with Lika, connections with the Einstein and all of the. Johannes is the communist, so the Makhlouf ben Nassim, the Algerian Jew that connects to Jews in France and Jews in, and then Yusso is the Senegalese tirailleurs, and that his father fought for World War One against Germany, and then he comes and fights for France, and then France basically instead so it's the colonialism is all there because of what happened to tirailleurs, and then Jolio, the Spanish Republicans, Mohand is the Amazigh Arab Muslim, and then the French captain, you can see, doesn't have a name there because he represents France and the colonial project. So all of these things, they're all intersected, all connected, and there are two things that I brought in the knowledge of how you the drama, but I also, or theater, and Nadjib brought in the skills of how you write the tablet and then how you turn this into a graphic. It was a perfect match. I said, and then you got to think about this. Nadjib was, when we started this in 2016, late 2016, early 2017, Nadjib was already going through chemotherapy with a bad cancer, and so there's also a human story there. And as he was fighting, every time he looks at me, he said, "Don't worry, I'm not gonna die before I finish this book." And he said, and then as we go through COVID, and he said, "Don't worry, this COVID is not gonna kill me. We'll finish this book." And then he finishes the book. Even Stanford, it was something that Stanford did, which is incredible. 6 months before he died, we finished it, but then the book, we didn't know when the book is going to come out. So Stanford actually were really nice to print a copy just for him to see it. And 3 months before he died, he looked at me, he said, sorry to use bad language here. He said, "Look, I told you this disease is not going to fucking kill me before I finished it. We won." And I'm very, it's incredible for me to have two people from the region at a moment when, coming from two countries that are, the politics of crazy politics happening now in the world, and for us to produce this positive piece of art and positive piece of education for us. For me, it's one of the, of course, the book that I did with my dad is one of the, for me, it's still a great book, but it's one of the best books I produce personally, because it means a lot to me. It's a human story. It's a true story. We dramatized it. We added a lot of literary styles to it. But and then getting to the translation, I believe I teach in an American institution. We get evaluated in English. That's how we get pay raises and all of these things. But I am very committed to translation because it's a justice. It's a question of justice. So we write things about people. They have to know them in their own language. So that's why for me, every book, every book, and then I have to commend UCLA and LNDV, Center for Jewish Studies, and the Moroccan LUR, and there are institutions in Morocco that are putting money, l'Académie de Royaume. All of these people were really putting money in these projects. A lot of money that goes into this project, as you know, and we're committed to broadening the sphere of readership so that people can know. That's all we can do. The people have to read. People, if they can read, and as people get introduced to these ideas, we broaden the perspective. We have different ways of looking at things, and also for me, it's a different way to expand Holocaust studies, because I personally think Holocaust studies, it's a moment of crisis, I would say, because you have to think always about, you have to change the zone, because people can see things from different perspective. And humbly, I'm trying. That's all I can do.
I mean, what you're doing is like I appreciate the humility, and I think we all do. But I just want to underline how sort of unbelievable and remarkable it is at the same time. And what I can say is that the sensitivity of this book, I think, sort of derives from a few sources. I mean, one is to the quality of your scholarship, okay, and sort of a fidelity to the historical actors with which you're so concerned. The other, I would say, as well, is that what it sort of makes clear to me is sort of, again, the multi-layered nature of this history. It's a history that cuts across geographies. So for those who haven't read the book or will read it again, I mean, sort of the seamlessness and also sort of the historical reality in which figures like sort of the German Jewish protagonists are then connected with some of the Muslim figures from rural Morocco to institutions fighting at the same time in interwar France and North Africa, not just against anti-Semitism, but Islamophobia as well at the same time. I mean, what you do through your work as a professional, but also just a remarkable human being, is show a level of sensitivity, which I think we all strive for. And to that point, I also want to underline this work of translation is no small matter. And depending on sort of where we are, we tend to think of sort of the world revolving around our language. I won't say which one in this room, but you get the point. And so this act of not just translating this work into Arabic, but what Omar is doing is also translating sort of, I would say, the most serious and significant scholarship on questions of North African Jewish history, the Jewish-Muslim relationship, but also sort of North African history without any of that into Arabic is, I mean, we already see the paradigm shift happening. And so you can see that in sort of the graduate students who are beginning to fan out across the United States and Canada. But now if we look to Morocco and Algeria as well, this is really sort of a sea change in a history in which very different types of people are participating and contributing with, again, the most sort of incredible of outcomes. So I just wanted to thank you for that. And
I just want to thank here Khalid Ben Saghir. I think he's been an amazing partner in this. we started this project in 2014 with I went to him and I asked him to translate my book, and he has already translated Susan Miller's first book and Daniel Schroeter's first two books, and translated also other books. Then I went to him, and since then it's been one of the best friendship I had with a Moroccan scholar, where we are taking books in English, translating them into Arabic and French sometimes, and we went from my book when I'm one. Now we have close to 30 books. Hopefully, by 2030, I have given the sign to Liuer, which is a partner in this project with UCLA, that hopefully by year 2030 we'll be publishing 100 books.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
I think we're going to open it up for questions.
Thank you. Yes, is this microphone on?
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you very much for the fascinating presentation. So I was wondering, to what extent for you is the desert, the landscape of the desert, a character in the artistic, in the history, and in the aesthetics of the history? And were you at all influenced? Because I'm thinking of, there's Casablanca, but another book where the aesthetics of the desert and the landscape of the desert is very influential, and it's a book and a film about this time. But I'm more influenced by the book. Is Michael and Nadjib, The Inflected. And particularly the narrative and the writing of that book that are extremely brilliant. So I wondered whether that book, whether on Nadjib's depiction of the desert, was with you at all, even though it's a different history and a different set of characters.
That's a great question. I think outside of this World War II history, I grew up in the desert, and I actually, part of the reason why I appreciated being in the United States is living in Tucson, Arizona. When I arrived, I spent some time in Barcelona, and I did not like it as beautiful as Barcelona is. And then I came to, in the 1990s, I was supposed to start a PhD at Missouri, Columbia. I went there for 2 months, and I said, this is not for me. I went back to Morocco, and then I went to Tucson. That's where I did my PhD, and I loved it. I loved the palm tree, and my favorite tree is the palm tree. It's still, it's the growing up in southern Morocco. I was a shepherd, and so I like the calmness. Even though living in LA right now, it's just not doesn't compare, but it's definitely part of my life, and I always think through the oasis. I really, even in Arizona, at UCLA, and in the heart of California, I always go back to the desert, and it's part of that. I think it's probably what driven some of the beautiful landscape you see in the book that are coming out of pictures that I took, and that Nadjib was able to reproduce, and also because of also his own life also in the Algerian desert. So it's there. There is a lot of literature that's coming out about. One of my colleagues, Brahim Ghibli, is coming out with a book soon. I can't say with whatever because it's still being reviewed, but it's going to be an amazing book also that reflects on the desert and how it's important to this landscape. The other reason why I think the desert is important, because when you think about questions of memory and erasure and sustainability of memories, one of the reasons why the French did put some of these camps on purpose in these desert environments is because they were interested in not leaving landmarks for them. It's totally different from the German model of camps. The Vichy model of camps, that's either in deserts or in forests. So you look at, for instance, Gours and other camps in France, they're all overtaken by the forest. And then if you look at the camps that we talk about here, you don't see, unless you really know the description of them and you go, and then some landmarks are left there, but usually we don't Most of those camps were put there on purpose, and they talked about it. That's why the prisoners were not allowed to write. They were not. The only biography we have about the camps is a biography, works that were written by Spanish Republican internees who were later survived and wrote about it. And then the only document we have is a report by an Algerian nationalist who was kept in a camp called Jenin Bourrezg. That's the only one we have, and that's really why also the desert is important in this because it's about the survival of memories of the camp and the longevity of these camps, which, as I said, Vichy ruler at the time and the administration that was in charge of all of the camps, they had instructions to make sure that these camps don't have buildings that are actually, that's why they have tents, mostly tents, you can see, or buildings that are tied mostly to the infrastructure of the army in general.
If there is only one memoir that survived or one record, how did that happen? How did that survive when such an effort was made to erase everything else?
I think we have official histories in the document, so we have a lot of things that was recorded and was left in the documents, especially if you go to Nantes, les archives de Nantes, the American National Archive. We have a lot of reports about camps also that were documents that were left by Spanish Republicans, people who fought against Franco and ended up fleeing to North Africa and being interned in these camps. But biographies that are personal, that talk about their experience, not a lot. We do have a few in English, or at least if you don't have the whole book you have one section that you have to go through 2 pages or 3 pages. But one document that talks about the experience in the camp, that's what you have in Europe, for instance, not a lot. And especially stuff written by Muslims who were also a part of these camps, not a lot. So, and how I personally think, given what I found out as far as the instructions that were given to the guards and to the army that was in charge of the managing and the camps, that you have no access to paper, you have no access to pens. If you get writing, you get actually beaten up and put through all these systems of basically mistreatment as an intern in the camp. So few people actually, even though we have a lot of people who came up who were in the camps with very strong educational backgrounds in some of these camps. You have people, doctors, you have teachers, in some of these camps. And then people, I think, it's just the dispersion of these people at some point. They end up spending 6 months or 7 months there. They have no idea about the history of the region. What you see is just what's left in the letters that they were sending to Nelly Ben Attar, for instance, the lawyer who was trying to help them get visas to go to the US or even post-war to be freed from the camp. So, and also I think it's, as I said at the beginning, it has to do with this notion of guilt. Who am I I survived, who am I to write about my story where people survived Auschwitz and other concentration camps.
Thank you so much. For somebody who thinks she knows a little bit, I learned so much just listening to you today.
Thank you.
I think this is a wonderful way to present a story to, as you mentioned, to high school students. I can think of several people I know who this book would be perfect for. But in the 1970s and 1980s, I worked here in this building in an organization that helped immigrants coming from Morocco, mostly Morocco, but some also from other North African countries, and sitting here thinking now, how many of those people were part of that story?
Yeah.
nobody ever showed, they didn't talk about it, and I can understand why, because there was no interest in hearing them. I don't know what people talked about within their own families, but we had precious resources, people who had lived through those 4 years and nothing. But my question, to go back to your allusion to reparations, were these, in the whole story of reparations and that were eventually negotiated for survivors, was this group of people and survivors part of the reparations story?
It depends. You're alluding to the some that came here and then they were able to get some support.
Generally,
Generally, yeah, there was a case. I don't know if you followed the case that the Supreme Court of Israel and that ended up denying that in the Moroccan case. Um, my co-author and I were actually, we don't talk a lot about it because we were asked to, and then we declined because of the book we were writing about it. So hopefully we're talking about it in the book. But it's mentioned. It's part of the story, yes. But the only camp that actually was part of the German preparation is Tendrara. For some reason, that's one of the few camps that were not only under Vichy control, but also was under German control. Let me just, if you don't mind, I'm going to give one. Yeah. So these camps were broken into 3 categories. What we have, once you arrive to Casablanca, you get picked up at some point by the French army or the police, or whatever, and then you're sent to what's called a camp de séjour. And then there's only 2 camps called one Sid al-Ayashi, not far from a few miles from Casablanca, called in a place called Azmour. If you guys, people who know the job, and then from there they get separated. You have children, if there are children and elderly that are separated from the able people who can work. Then they get sent to camps all over. I think we have if you go back to the back, there is a map. Yeah. Just to show you this, how complex, right here. So if you look at here, I'm not going to fall. So right here, Sid al-Ayashi or Azmour. So you get here, and then on purpose, the French made sure that they don't have them inside Casablanca. They get sent to Sid al-Ayashi. They get distributed to all over the south, so the south, north, to the Algerian. So you never spend more than between 4 or 6 months. So you move, and the only one that was not under is Tenderara. Yeah. So to answer your question, yes, it depends. Some people didn't accept. Some people didn't even talk about it. But you're right. Later on, I did a lot of interviews with members of the Moroccan Jewish community in LA, and it's fascinating because a lot of them actually came from in the 50s and 60s. Also, they were involved in the army, in the American army. They worked with the American army after the American landing, and they talk about this. But it's just now people are starting to go back to this. But unfortunately, the majority of people who went through that have already passed away.
Can I add something about reparations? I just want to say it's a great question. It's a quite complicated one because of the multiple parties at play.
Yeah.
And then the fact that we know from other contexts that the burden of proof is on the victim. Yeah. And so what you're dealing with is just sort of not only sort of multiple legal regimes at play here. So Algerian Jews who were by and large, but not entirely, citizens of France before 1940, whose citizenship was taken away from them. You also have the issue of sort of Vichy's legitimacy or not vis-a-vis the Third Republic and that which comes after it. What Omar described as, in some cases, sort of limited source material that's memoiristic or impressionistic, that sort of would allow for that burden of proof to be surpassed. And then the question of who are you asking reparations from? Is it the German government or is it the French government? And if it's the French government, then there's a whole other series of questions about reparations for those who were forced into labor before the Second World War that come to the fore as well. And so that's what I was sort of alluding to before, that the issues here, again, when we're thinking about center and periphery, suddenly move quite close to the center. And so some of the reparations have come through Germany, but not yet through France.
And even when people are asking, for instance, for the Moroccan government to be a part of this, you see a lot of pushback from North African Jews themselves, Moroccan Jews themselves. A lot of them are said no. So there's a huge, it's a complex story that we try to deal with, and I am not. I think my former advisor, probably Daniel Schroeter, is more expert at it because he really knows the Hebrew. He knows all these legal. So that's one of his things that we're talking about the book, and it's mostly he's it's not my, because I lack good knowledge of Hebrew, so that's why I can't venture to say that I know all the details yet.
If I may,
Yes.
I am part of Jewish
Mhm.
My mother is still alive. I heard about those camps recently. When I say recently, my grandfather and brother was I'm trying to text with her right now. She's not here now because she doesn't speak the word of English. I didn't think to bring her here today, but I'm trying to get information right now to understand exactly the kind of camp they were sending. But all the family, all the men of the family went to those camps. They were working. I know that they were working. I don't remember exactly the story, but that story has never been told myself or to my cousin before the last few years. I don't know why. Maybe because what you say is true. You were believing that their story was less valuable than the one of the Holocaust survival. But as my mother said, if the Americans were not going to enter into North Africa, she will not be here now, and I will not be here. She can tell a lot of things about that period. So what you say about the citizenship of French Syrian Jewish people is true and untrue. You have to remember that under Napoleon III, Napoleon III proposed to the Jewish to have the French citizenship. So there were two kinds of Jewish at this time in Algeria. The one who have accepted the citizenship, that period which was around 1860, something like that, 1870. And it was the case of one part of my family, and the one who were French because of the decree period,
Exactly.
which came after. And my
1870.
1870 is
1870.
the
Decree.
Premier Decree.
1870.
family was on French because of the decree impérial.
Wait. 1860, that's or
1865.
1865.
The Jewish
Yeah.
who were concerned by the Vichy laws in Algeria was one under
Wait.
not decree impérial,
Yeah.
which was a big difference because the family of my mother was allowed to still have access to run the restaurant that they were having, and which was not the case of the other two. But because they were kind of exception, I did close the restaurant. My mother can tell you that they have been thrown away from school. One day she came and the directrice, the manager of the school said, go back to home and get them chocolate. But what I remember, and that's what I try to get right now, is to the information of the kind of camps they were going, and she said that it was at the frontier of Sahara and Vichy, and all the men of the family went there.
Well, it could be Hajrat McGill, it could be Manaba, it could be any of those, Bu'arfa, it could be any of those. Yeah, but these are the ones you're talking about here are Algerian Jews. Most of the Algerian Jews that ended up interned in camps were Camp Bedou, and that's one of the main camps where the majority of the internees were Algerian. In Colombia, were Algerian Jews. Were Algerian Jews. The rest, we're talking here about mostly European Jews coming from all over Europe, who fled as early as 1933, right after Hitler took over, and which is the difference. And then a lot of Algerian Jews ended up actually fleeing to Morocco. So we have a community of Algerian Jews who are part of Casablanca community. They have their own synagogues. They have their own. So it's a much complicated story. I don't think this book and a lot of we actually scratched the surface. It's just one story that gives you a bird's eye view about the realities of that movement. And we don't talk a lot about Moroccan Jews themselves because none of Moroccan Jews have a special status, as well as Tunisian Jews in many ways, even though some of them were what people talk about, people being expelled from Medina and to the New Mela. It happens in certain cases in Fez and in Casablanca. It does happen when it comes to limitations as far as access to jobs as lawyers and teachers and access. It's in many ways, it's very similar to Algeria and Tunisia. Depending on the regions, in what's happening in the south, for instance, in villages, are that not very different from what happened in cities too. So a much more complicated story and that's, I think, the nuance that we're trying to bring here to be fair to historical accounts.
What is really interesting is that I never heard
Yeah.
never a word about it. Died in 1997. I don't have, and I was really close to it. I never had a conversation. My mother raised it later on, and I was really surprised when she talked about it. No, things you're not talking about the camp, you are talking about something. No, I'm talking about that's really right.
Thank you
so much. So those are all the questions for this evening.
Thank you.
I just want to thank Omar and Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Man, thank you.
Thanks. It was great.
Thank you. Thanks. Don't forget your books.
I won't.
Yeah.
Thanks for the kind
Thank you.
introduction.
Thank you. Thanks.
Was not able to ask or make a comment.
Yes.
I've been a docent here for 30 years.
Oh, that's amazing.
Wow.
Not amazing. I started as
I work with docents.
I
Students
started as a 10-year-old.
yeah. Oh, that's amazing.
But
That's
I
even.
want to say
Yeah.
to you, in our own museum,
Yeah.
there is only one smidgen of a North African
story about my father.
resident from Montreal.
Yeah.
There you can take a look.
says
That one's
10
probably easier
words.
for you.
So when we're presenting the overview, it's minimal and almost non-existent to
Yeah,
the
thanks.
almost
Yeah.
25,000
Normal to have a conversation
that
in
you
front
have
of,
living in
40
Montreal.
people.
And the other thing is,
Hey, Yosef, how you doing? Good to see you. Thanks for coming. Yeah. How's everything?
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I think it links perfectly to the reading of this week about
Yeah.
culture of the Jews.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same.
Good work.
Yeah.
No, it's part. Yeah. We'll talk about it on Thursday, but that's
I'm
great.
keeping my questions for tomorrow.
That's good. That's good.
One story
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah. Thank you.
And Professor Boum talked about his personal journey.
Yeah.
His father.
Yeah.
The image that came to my mind is the alchemist of
Yeah.
because talk about places they go a few kilometers from his house.
Yeah.
The journey that he had with his father
Yeah,
until he died
yeah.
last week.
It's amazing.
It's
Yeah,
a
you're
very
right.
interesting
You're right.
point of view about if he felt a closure with his father because when he elderly doesn't talk about the period like the war.
Yeah.
And hearing my grandmother also didn't talk about it with my parents. With my mother.
That's true, right.
When
There's
they
lots
came
of
to us,
reasons.
they
Yeah.
did or Yad Vashem, the testimony pages. So she started to open up, and then eventually Yad Vashem came and filmed it. Wow! But it's very interesting to see that the third generation is very It's
No, it has
very
to do
meaningful.
the climate. I mean, the climate in which you can tell a story or not makes a huge difference. You know?
Yeah, and it's outraging that this story about the African Jews and the African Holocaust is only now revealing in the last 20 years. One lecture of the Jews.
No, that's right. That there's work to be done, and it's plural. And, good. Sorry to give you all that reading, but
Yes. I didn't read the response.
it's okay. I'm behind on the reading as well. It's okay. I'm very behind as
So
well.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah. Thanks. I'll see you for lunch tomorrow.
Yeah,
At noon.
12
Thompson.
at Brown.
Thompson.
Thompson.
House.
I
Yeah.
don't know where it is yet, but
You'll
I'll
find it.
Yeah,
Just go up the hill.
In Peel.
McTavish.
McTavish. Okay.
Yeah. You cross the